to thank all the brave students who were in the Gaza Solidarity encampment and faced off against 13 hours of brutal police repression called on by the Chancellor. I cannot stand idly by and know that my tuition and my voice is being used to fund the genocide in Gaza. Shame on President Drake, shame on Cynthia Larive, shame on Lori Klitzer for all they do to brutalize, to silence us. Free, free Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine! Thank you.
Welcome to Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills, that's me, where we present clear thinking on confusing topics in challenging times. You just heard a commencement speech by student Cortez de Garçon at UCSC's Cowell College graduation ceremonies this past weekend. Stay with us for a short news brief on student protesters at the UC. Our guest this evening is Ashira Ali Darwish, who is featured prominently in the documentary film Where Olive Trees Weep, which was produced by and is being promoted by the spiritual group Science and Non-Duality, or SAND. This program, Moment of Truth, is co-sponsoring a showing of this film on Sunday, June 23rd at 6:30 p.m. in conjunction with the Real Works Labor Film Festival at the Center for Spiritual Living in Live Oak, with a chance for facilitated small and large group listening and dialogue circles after the screening. Real Works will show the film again in Watsonville on Tuesday evening, June 25th at the Somos Cafe. Now our news update. Over 100 students were arrested at the University of California at Santa Cruz during pro-Palestinian protests at the base of campus on May 31st, where a roadblock had been set up at the main entrance to UCSC by activists. A Moment of Truth journalist was blocked by police that morning from entering the intersection where protesters were in a standoff with officers. This kind of restriction on journalists by police is illegal in the state of California. Mei-Ling Obinata here at KSQD interviewed several students in our studios who said they were forced to sit in a bus for hours after their arrests, using a bus stairwell as a makeshift bathroom and even urinating in their own clothes, with their wrists in zip ties. We will provide a link to that show with Mei-Ling and student activists in our show notes for this program. Some of the best reporting on all of this is at the on-campus news outlet City on a Hill Press. Israeli political leader Benny Gantz, considered a centrist over Benjamin Netanyahu, stepped down from the Israeli war cabinet, citing no real plan to end the war and a lack of commitment to hostage release and a ceasefire. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu then dissolved the Unity War Cabinet altogether. With continued bombings and fires in the north of Israel and Lebanon, tens of thousands of Israeli residents have been displaced from cities like Kiryat Shmona, while in Gaza, nearly 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, with hundreds of thousands wounded. In the occupied territory of the West Bank, more than 500 Palestinians have also been killed by Israeli military forces, and 24 Israelis have been killed. Today, we have a special guest on our program who may be able to help provide context, insight, and a human voice on this catastrophe. A woman who was born and grew up in Palestine in the occupied territory known as East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Ashira Ali Darwish worked for 15 years as a TV and radio journalist and researcher in Palestine for the BBC, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch. She is the founder of Catharsis Holistic Healing, a trauma therapy project pioneering a type of Sufi active meditation which draws its roots from ancestral and indigenous knowledge. Her personal healing journey from full-body paralysis with a severed spinal cord in 2012 has given her a deep insight into the process of recovery and healing. In 2021, she received the ISABS honors from the Indian Society for Applied Behavioral Science for her contribution to positive societal transformation. Ashira is featured prominently in the documentary film currently screening worldwide titled Where Olive Trees Weep, released by the spiritual group Science and Non-Duality. The Moment of Truth team and the Real Work Labor Film Festival is co-sponsoring a showing of this film on Sunday in Live Oak with another showing scheduled for Tuesday in Watsonville. Ashira, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy, for having me today.
Yeah, well, we're so glad you could join us because I have a feeling you're very busy and traveling all around the country. Where are you now?
Currently in Salt Lake City.
In Salt Lake City, Utah. And you have your children with you?
Indeed. My partner and my kids.
Okay.
We rented a motorhome and we're driving cross country.
Wow.
Started off in Boston.
Wow. And have you been to the States before?
Yes.
Okay.
My first time was when I was 16, and then I went again when I was 21, and then I came a few times for work.
Yeah, like because your English is like perfect, you know. So what I'd like to do is play a clip from the film Where Olive Trees Weep, because I know that you're here promoting the film, and then we can springboard from that clip. This is an audio clip from the film. Is that all right with you?
Of course.
Okay, so here we go. This is from the beginning, pretty much the beginning of the film, Where Olive Trees Weep.
I'm not hurting you. I'm not hurting you. I'm not hurting you.
So the musical team started making a human chain so that at least they can't breach us. And I thought I was in part of that human chain. And I was holding on. And then I saw that people were being taken further and further away. And I was still the only one that was being held in the human chain. I was like, okay, I'll keep the whole human chain. Until I realized that something was wrong and I was being pulled too far. So I started pushing him, kicking the guy behind me and saying, Khalas, we have to go back. Until I turned and he put the Israeli military police hat on. And I looked at him and I was trying to run away. And he basically took me down to the ground, and I remember my head banging, and I then woke up with I don't know how many soldiers and police beating my knees. And they were just going and going, and I would wake up and look and see the cameras flashing, and I could see that there were like other people around. But then I would just look at them and they would keep going. I would faint again and wake up. Of course, the police handcuffed me, slammed me into a Jeep. And there was a young boy and they kept beating him and beating him and beating him. And his head was just going next to me. So I started beating and starting to shout in the Jeep so that I can get... That's when the shock went and the anger rose. Another kid gets beaten up and thrown with blood on his face, and I froze.
That was a clip from the film Where Olive Trees Weep, and we are interviewing Ashira Ali Darwish, who is prominently featured in this film. You're probably the main speaker of this film, actually, Ashira. And this is a time when I think you were at 16. Is this in Jerusalem where this protest happened?
Yes.
You were at? Mm-hmm. The film starts with you being that age and going to a protest because your mother asked you to come. I mean, were you protesting before that? Because I remember in the film she says, come and see what a peaceful protest can be, and then you got to see that, right? But what were you doing before that?
I would go out of school. I was my English is thanks to the Quaker school. I studied in a Quaker school in Ramallah.
Yeah.
And an American school. And we would, my school was bombed, our chapel was bombed in the beginning of 2001 in the second Intifada. And we would protest and leave the school every day and go to checkpoints with the Israeli soldiers. And yeah, that's how I used to know protests. I used to know soldiers at a distance just shooting live ammunition and tear gas at us and rubber bullets. And my mom was like, "Ooh, come see." She thought it would be safer. She was worried that I would keep going to these protests, and she wanted me to find, I guess, a safer way in her mind to protest, which was through singing. And of course, I ended up, as you see in the film, being arrested, beaten, and I was also given an order that I wasn't allowed to be. So it was like house arrest for 20 days.
After you got arrested at that time. But then eventually you ended up in an Israeli prison that you talk about. And I forget the name of the prison, but can you tell us the name of that prison again?
It's the Russian compound. It's the Moscovia, and I was never arrested. I was only detained.
I see.
The 3 times that I was, yes. The legality matters.
Right.
The words. So I was always detained. I was never charged with anything. because all of my detentions were illegal. So when they detained me, it was illegal to detain me each and every time.
I see. So, and this is true for a lot of Palestinians, that they are currently within the justice system or in detention without charges being filed, without access to any kind of trial or, jury trial or anything, really.
Yeah, there's a procedure which is called administrative detention, which means that Israel can hold you up to 6 months without you ever facing trial, without you knowing the charges on what they call a secret file. And of course, this is being used just to persecute activists and human rights journalists, human rights defenders, musicians, lawyers. Everyone who they can't silence in another way, they put in prison for 6 months, and they can renew it indefinitely. So you can end up being in prison for years without ever seeing a judge or knowing what you're charged for. But I wasn't even detained on that. I was just detained like what they call precaution, like detention, and they will then see if there's anything against you to be able to charge you or to take the case further.
Yeah. I think that, what happened on October 7th and everything that's happened after that has been such a shock to so many people, and not to everyone, right? There are people who were studying what was happening in Palestine and the West Bank and Gaza for some time, and clearly people who are very interested. I have to say that I have a marriage relationship that has put me in Israel a few times, and I have driven by the wall that divides, Israel proper from the West Bank. I've been in Jerusalem, and I've been in the different quarters of Jerusalem, but I don't think I ever knew what was happening behind the wall. And I think a lot of people have not known what was happening behind the wall, and so I'm wondering if you could lay that out for people a little bit. We saw, because the film shows you being detained, being thrown into this compound, and being put in solitary confinement in this terrible cell where you couldn't put your head. You couldn't rest your head anywhere because there were things on the wall. Is that right? Like some kind of bumps on the wall or something?
Yeah, it's like a poking. It's specific, like it's a special made wall so that you can't sleep,
right,
or lie down.
Yeah. And so I wonder if you could describe. I mean, I don't know how much you traveled around in the West Bank. I imagine you have as a journalist. You've been probably to a lot of places. What do people not understand if they haven't looked into what is happening in the occupied territories? What really is happening there?
What's been happening has been happening since 1948, since Israel's occupation and beginning of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Since then, millions of Palestinians had been exiled and kicked out of the country, and massacres perpetrated in order to ethnically wipe out areas so that the Israeli settlers coming from all over Europe and the rest of the world could come and claim a piece of land for them to live on, what remains of us after wiping us out, even living in what remains from Palestinian homes, and taking also the possessions of the Palestinians, and their family portraits are sometimes still until today displayed in Israeli homes. So what has started a long time ago, and it's very saddening to know that people wouldn't even know what's going on behind the wall or inside Palestine of 48 land, which is what currently Israel calls Israel, because this was all funded and curated by the Americans and the British. So it's pretty much the American dollars that have created this situation and continue to fund it and continue to support Israel. And as we have seen in Nusayrat, they actually have put their boots on the ground to massacre Palestinians. And what has been happening, if you listen to the media, which is controlled mainly by, of course, the Israelis and the propaganda machine of Israel, you would think that there's a bunch of Arabs, not Palestinians, who happened to be in the land which Israel occupied, and they fought, and they're very hostile. And you don't get the context of how we were pushed out of our country, pushed out of our homes, our families separated. My grandfather was kicked out of Jerusalem in 1967 along with my uncles, and pushed into Jordan, and they didn't leave on their own accord, we must say. It was after the massacring of thousands of Palestinians in Deir Yassin that our families were pushed out after one of my uncles was shot. And what people don't understand is that this is the core of what is happening, and what happened in 7th of October is nothing but a response to 76 years of occupation, ethnic cleansing, and apartheid. All it takes is one person to walk in Hebron and to understand what is apartheid when you're talking about putting Israeli settlers in the heart of a Palestinian city. And in order for them to be able to hold the Israelis in that area, it means that they've created sterile roads for their settlers, which means Palestinians are not even allowed to walk on their main roads. They closed 60% of the shops. The houses are all closed. We have to travel on the rooftops in order to get from one house to another. We are under a brutal military occupation, which means that if I have to walk from my house to my school, which is in Ramallah, as a person living from Jerusalem, I would have to cross 4 checkpoints, guns pointed at me at all times. Israeli soldiers, depending on their mood, would decide if they had a fight with their girlfriend the day before, it might mean that I would be strung, beaten up, and held at a checkpoint for hours. Every aspect of our life has been controlled since 1948. Even who you're allowed to marry, your love life is controlled by an Israeli soldier. They've cut us, separated us, and divided us into small areas of Area C, Area A, and we're not allowed to be married even across the borders and across the walls. And it's a way to push us out of the country. Every policy within the Israeli state is catered in order to make our lives miserable to the point where we have to leave.
So tell me more about this, what you said about who you are dating, who you are.
So when you're born in Palestine, you are immediately given an ID by the Israelis. So if you think about it in European terms, if you think about what happened in World War II and the Nazis, what the Nazis did is they would divide people into areas and ghettos, and then they would give each person a number and an ID to identify where they are from, and where, if they're Jewish, if they're Gypsy, if they are disabled, they would mark you each with a different type of identification number, so that they know where you're allowed to go and where they're going to send you eventually to die in that war. In our terms, wherever you are born, you are identified also by a number, which is your ID, and the color of your ID. So if you're born inside Ramallah, which is under Palestinian Authority, you would have a Palestinian ID, which means that you are barred entry to any of the inside Israel, and you're barred entry to Jerusalem. If you're born in Gaza, you would have a Gaza ID, which is a different color, and that means you're not allowed to go into Israel proper or into the West Bank and East Jerusalem. If you are born like me and have a Jerusalem ID means that you are allowed to go anywhere except for Gaza, but it means that you have you have a special status. So it's like a residency, but not a nationality.
So you can go inside of is what's called Israel proper. You can travel throughout Israel proper. If
yes.
You have, okay, got you. Okay.
Yes, and you can travel inside the West Bank. But for example, if you fall in love with somebody from behind the wall, a Palestinian, you're not allowed. They are not allowed to come and join you in Jerusalem, and you would have to go live in what they call Area C if they allow you, or you lose your ID card and your right to your health care, everything that comes with it. If you are a Palestinian born in 48 land occupied by Israel in 48, and you hold an Israeli passport, then you are not allowed to enter the West Bank, and you're not allowed to get married to anyone from the West Bank, Palestinians, and you can marry from East Jerusalem, but their status would also change. So each of wherever you are, whichever territory ID you have, it controls who you're allowed to marry or not. And for us East Jerusalemites and 48 Palestinians, that means we mix, of course, our schools, our universities, and you are very likely to fall in love with somebody in the West Bank, but you're not allowed to get married to them. And if you do, then you will lose a lot of your benefits.
Wow. So I just want to ask you some questions that I can hear in my mind, from Jewish people that I know, from Israeli people that I know, who would say, well, wait a second, we didn't control Gaza for a long time. It was Egypt. And, when we were first allotted this country, the first thing that happened was that Arab nations attacked us, for example. So they would say this is not all our fault, basically, right? Like, there have been these other things that happen, and Jordan could have done this or that, all these different sort of arguments. Go ahead.
These are all excuses to me. At the end of the day, prior to 1948, there was no state of Israel. And the Arabs wouldn't go after any Jew anywhere in the world and kill them. The Palestinians, my family in Jerusalem, took Holocaust surviving refugees from running from the Holocaust into our houses to help save them. And it was we had Jewish neighbors. There was no problems for us with Jews. The problem started with the decision to create an Israeli state on our blood, in the sense that even when the Arabs fought back, it was the Arabs trying to make sure that some Palestinians remain on their land and not all of them are exiled. And the decision, if the Arabs attacked an army coming to occupy not only Palestine. If you look at the soldiers, the banners on the soldiers' hands now invading and killing people in Gaza, you will see Greater Israel drawn on it, which includes parts of Egypt, part of Saudi, part of Lebanon, and Syria. It's an army of invaders that came from outside and started killing and ravaging. So it didn't start. The Palestinians definitely did not start this, and the Arabs definitely did not start this. We didn't decide to come to Europe and take over any state or kick people out of their homes and occupy them in order for us to take over. And it's not an issue of religion. There's so many Jews that remain on the side of the Palestinians. There's so many Jews that are fighting, because just as Israel occupied Palestine, it's occupying the Jewish religion, and Zionism uses Judaism and the Jewish fear, rightful fear, and anti-Semitism, just as an argument in order to manipulate and use this religion in order to achieve their agenda, which is a colonialist agenda, which is to take over this land and control it.
You mentioned this flag, and it just struck me that I just suddenly had an image, and I thought that's very. You're saying that there's a flag that that the IDF is using in Gaza, that they're flying in Gaza, that includes like the Sinai. I mean, what is that? Could you describe that?
It's not a flag. It's a patch which is put on the soldiers' clothing.
I see.
So it's like a badge for the platoons, and also on the Israeli Agora, you can see that there's the map of the Greater Israel.
The Israeli Agora. What is that? The Agora.
The coin. It's one of the.
Okay.
The coin.
Got you. Oh, so it includes like the occupied territories, basically. And
not the occupied territories. It includes Syria. It includes Lebanon. It includes Egypt. It includes parts of Saudi Arabia.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's okay. Wow. Okay.
What is called by the Zionists the Greater Israel.
Okay. We are talking with Ashira Ali Darwish, who is featured prominently in the new documentary film Where Olive Trees Weep, which is being shown this Sunday at the Center for Spiritual Living. Our radio show team is going to be co-sponsoring this with the Real Work Labor Film Festival with a dialogue afterwards. So I want to come back to, say you're in the West Bank and you're traveling around, you see these roads that are separate from the roads that Palestinians can travel on. Is that right? And then you have also checkpoints, like how going from city to city, every how, I'm trying to get a visual image.
So
for
Israel,
people.
If you want to look at the map, and there's great maps that show what Israel has done. So inside the West Bank itself, we are not allowed to travel freely from one Palestinian village to a Palestinian city. Each and every road inside the West Bank is controlled by the Israeli army and by the Israeli settlers, armed Israeli settlers ready to kill any Palestinian, I have to say. And you can see that in the rampages and burning of the houses in Hawara. You can check how settlers have been attacking Palestinians in the West Bank. So all of these streets are controlled by Israel. Israel continues to control all of the West Bank and Gaza. And you asked me, before about the Israelis' argument that they left Gaza and Gaza is under the control of Egypt. Gaza is not under control of Egypt. Gaza is under control of Israel. And even when they got out the settlers out of Gaza, they continued to control Gaza by air, by water. Each and every port is controlled by Israel. So Gaza was never not under Israeli occupation. Under all international law, Israel remains the main authority in control. If they are controlling you access to food, water, if they're controlling each and every port and entry and exit, that means they're controlling it.
I see.
And even with Egypt, they weren't even with Egypt during this escalation of the ethnic cleansing right now happening in Gaza, the Egyptians weren't even allowed to decide who enters and who exits Gaza for medical attention. It's the Israelis who decide.
Right. Even before October 7th, the Israelis were deciding that. In terms of who was leaving through the Rafah gate too, where they decide. I mean, okay, I do remember
everything is under control of the Israelis.
Yes, I understand that. I guess I'm remembering that Egypt did control Gaza for some time at the very beginning, but that was, I can't even recall the years right now. But okay, so
that was prior to 1967. That was before 1967. Egypt was in control of Gaza, and the Jordanian kingdom was in charge of the West Bank for 1967. Then Israel occupied the West Bank and Sinai from Egypt and the Golan Heights from Syria, which it continues to occupy.
Yeah. And you said something about traveling on the tops of roofs.
Yes. So if you go to Hebron, so what they've done in Hebron is there's sterile roads. We depurify them with our Palestinian blood if we walk on these streets. So it's only for settlers, and the Palestinians who live on these streets are not allowed to open the door which takes them to the main road. They created holes in their roofs, and they move from one roof to the other until they manage to get to the area where they can come down to a non-sterile road, a non-purified road.
I see. Okay, and so it was here that you were born? Were you born in Ramallah?
No, I was born in Cyprus.
Oh, okay. And so how did you come back to the West Bank?
So my mother married my Egyptian father in Beirut, in Lebanon. And they had my sister in Lebanon, and then they traveled to Cyprus with when the Palestinians were kicked out of Lebanon.
Okay.
And that's where they had me in Cyprus, and then they came back to the country during the first Intifada.
I see. So it was sort of like we wanted.
I was only 2 years old when I got to Palestine.
Wow. Okay. Okay, you are listening to Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills. We are talking to Ashira Ali Darwish from Palestine, from the Occupied Territories, and we will be right back after this break to talk some more with someone who's featured in a film that is just coming out globally. You can get it on the internet too. It's called Where Olive Trees Weep. So we will rejoin you in a minute.
How does the wall keep us free, my children, my children? How does the wall keep us free?
How does the wall keep us free? The wall keeps out the enemy, and we build a wall to keep us free. That's why we build a wall. We build a wall to keep us free.
Welcome back to Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills. And we are talking to Ashira Ali Darwish, who is featured very prominently in this film that's just been released by Science and Non-Duality called Where Olive Trees Weep, about really what's happening in the occupied territories. And I don't want to give away the whole film, but maybe you could summarize it for us and what you think it's really about, what it's presenting, or what you're hoping that it presents.
I think, first of all, the movie is beautifully done by Zaya and Maurizio, and it transports you into Palestine. So I wouldn't have to tell you about the checkpoints. You would be able to see life under occupation, and you'd be able to also learn about trauma and continuous trauma and intergenerational trauma. And it features, of course, Dr. Gabor Mate, who brilliantly talks about Jewish trauma and its interconnectedness with the situation in Palestine and what's going on there.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It also shows you a lot about the Palestinian people and our resilience.
There are parts of the film, I'm sure there was a lot of footage that ended up on the cutting room floor, right? And there's a point at which I was interested in this film because it was released by Science and Non-Duality, which to me is like a spiritual group. And I was surprised. I was like, oh, they're weighing in on this issue, and a lot of spiritual groups are not, a lot of people are not, because, and I can tell you from experience, things start to happen to you when you start speaking out about this issue. I guess there's a point at which, as a journalist, you've been covering, this whole, all kinds of things happening in the West Bank. I assume also in Israel proper. And you mentioned at one point you wanted to go cover some of the bombings of tell me if I've got this right, of Israeli settler homes in the West Bank, to see what you could if you could connect with these people and try to understand their reality. And then we didn't get to see if that happened or not in the film. So I'm really curious about that part of the film. Did you do that? Did you end up talking to some of these settlers, and what happened?
Yeah, so I did for a year report on Israeli news, and I went to Sderot, which is on the border with Gaza, and I went to the bomb shelters with the families when they were hiding from the bombs falling, the rockets.
Oh, so these were not settler homes. These were not settler homes in the West Bank. These were homes that were in, I guess you might call them settler homes too, right? But still, they were in Israel proper. Okay, gotcha. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I did cover their stories. I also covered the stories of kidnapped Israeli soldiers in Lebanon and met with the families and it's I connected with their pain as humans, of course, because for me to see any child going into a bomb shelter is not normal, and it shouldn't be the case. And it's not normal to see any parents having to suffer being away and from their kids and having that fear of something happening to them. So on a human level, of course, it was very. I felt for them exactly as I feel for watching what's happening to my people in Gaza. Or if I look at what's happening to the children in Congo and the women in Congo and Haiti and all these places where these foreign powers are using and abusing people in order to fulfill their biblical, or sometimes it's considered biblical, or they use it as an excuse, or it's just a matter of power and money and greed.
Yeah.
So for me, it was painful to watch, and I covered it to the best of my ability as a journalist so that I can also get their voices out. I didn't agree with the settlers, definitely, on some point, but it was my duty to show what they were saying and to get their voices heard. And yeah, I identify with anyone who's in a situation of war or in a situation of pain. And the sad reality is the other side never looks at us even as humans. So I know that there's a lot of backlash even to just screening our documentary, because it's, how dare you, they show something about the Palestinians and not show what's happening to the Israelis? Well, because the Israelis have not undergone 60 ethnic cleansing, and they're not being utilized. Their men are not being in Israeli prisons. Their children are not being beheaded and burned in Gaza, and humanity needs to stand. And if it was happening to anybody else, then I would be standing for it. But yeah, it feels as if it's the same system of white supremacy and colonialist mindset that if it's the side that we support, then we're going to listen. If it's somebody else, then they must be a terrorist and they deserve what's happening to them.
Yeah. One of the things you say in the film is, I want Israelis to see me, Jewish Israelis, to see me as human. And that just touched me because I feel like that's what this film is about. It's about, let's understand the context in which everything is happening, right? Nothing is happening in isolation. And so if we don't understand the context, then we'll have all kinds of thoughts and judgments about what is happening that are not based in actual reality. And so when you met with these Israelis to tell their stories, I assume they knew that you were Palestinian. Is that right?
So it sometimes I would, in order to get to the place, I wouldn't really identify as Palestinian, right, because we are dehumanized. They don't see us as humans. It's okay to kill our kids and babies because they are not human, and they're not our lives don't count. They don't matter, and it's not because the Israelis are evil. It's because the Zionist regime has been brainwashing, has been dehumanizing the Palestinians. They have the biggest propaganda machines. If you're an Israeli born inside, if you're an Israeli child, you're going to be taught from the moment you're born that the Palestinians are terrorists and they want to kill you, and that we are not humans and that we're not like them.
Yeah.
And this is the instrument of fear, which is used it was used by the Nazis in order to dehumanize the Jews, and in order for people to sit and watch 6 million people being burned and not move an inch. It took them so long to move to save them, when it was too late, when already 6 million people had already perished. And it's the same thing happening to the Palestinians. We're so dehumanized to the point that they don't see us. So I would sometimes pretend that I'm Jewish because I speak very good Hebrew, and my name is Ashira, so it's not very identifiable. And when I get there, I would tell them, like, yeah, I am Palestinian. I'm from East Jerusalem. Would you still let me, can I still interview you and your family? And I would explain to them that I would do it to so that I can represent their stories and get their voices heard on the other side as well. And they would let me do it. I was never kicked out of their houses after they meet me and see me. And also it's because I don't look like the Palestinians. They sometimes would always tell me, like, but are you sure you're Palestinian? Because you don't really look like a Palestinian. You have a tattoo, and you look. Right. Are you sure?
Yeah, because you don't wear a headscarf in the film, And frankly, when I hear you speaking, it reminds me of some of my Israeli friends, the way they speak, And there's just so much actual, I guess, kind of some similarities that are happening there amongst people, and yet this inability to say, hey, you're human like me, So given that, I wonder about hope, I wonder about this is a terrible situation. To me, I call it a total catastrophe. The war, you heard in the news brief that we gave at the top of the hour that Benny Gantz has left the war cabinet. The war cabinet has collapsed. And where is the end? What would your hope be now? And maybe you're not the person to speak to this, you're not necessarily representing any particular, organization or government.
Thank God I'm not a politician.
Right. But so do you see, I see groups like Standing Together and Combatants for Peace, and I keep thinking, why aren't these being funded like the most? This is where funding should go, is with these groups that are working together, for peace. And what do you see as possibly hopeful at this time?
I think before even any group talks to each other, we need to be acknowledged. What has been done to us needs to be acknowledged, seen, and witnessed. Before anything, Israel needs to acknowledge what it has done to us. 76 years of this brutality, of this torture that we have undergone and still are going through. What's happening now, and you see on the television, of Palestinians being burned, starved to death, and systematic. Everything they're doing is systematic to completely empty out Gaza. And it's not only about Gaza. The same policies are against us in the West Bank. I had to leave my home, my family, and everyone, so that people here in the U.S. can watch this film. If I stayed, my children wouldn't be with their mother. I would be arrested, tortured for showing this documentary.
I see.
My friends, the musicians that I know have been haunted, taunted, and threatened by Israelis because they sing and talk about Palestine. No one in the West Bank or in Palestine 48 or in Jerusalem is safe. We have our olive trees aren't even safe. Nothing of us is safe, and we need this to be acknowledged, what has been done to us, and for the rest of the world to know that this is being done with their money. For the rest of it's so pivotal, the fact that here in the U.S. most of the protests are being also done in collaboration with Jewish Voices, because it's being done in their name. Yeah. To us, their religion is being co-opted and occupied in order for Zionists, for someone like Netanyahu, who is corrupt internally and who is brutal, who will be named just as Hitler was named. He will be named for the atrocities that he's brought over, not only to the Palestinians, to every Israeli child who had to experience what has happened, and also to be done in their name for the Israeli soldiers that have gone into Gaza and had to burn and press the button in order to burn Palestinian families completely, to annihilate them. They will have to live with this guilt, this conscience. It will be on their conscience forever. And every American who's paid 25 cents in order for the bombs to fall on our children has to recognize what they have done. Nothing will happen until there's a recognition and there's an apology. I don't know if an apology is enough for what we have gone through. I don't know if an apology is okay for all the friends that I have lost in the past years, or for the friends that are now coming out of prison and telling me the horror stories of their torture, or for my friend who had to give birth to her newborn while the father was in prison because he posted a poem on Facebook. Our lives matter, and our lives are just the same as everybody else. And we believe everybody has the right to exist in freedom, justice, and in equality. So first, the world has to recognize what they have done. Israel has to recognize what it has done. Otherwise, it will never end. It will never end, because the Palestinians, we have hope. Trust me, we have hope and faith 100% that after all this brutality that we have seen, Israel will not continue to exist. Because no brutality of such form was able to continue. Nothing that is built on so much blood will continue. And they cannot maintain such a regime that goes against any human. The monstrosities that have been done, if you hear the voices that are coming from Palestine, it's unbearable.
Yeah.
And this cannot continue.
Yeah, so many, not just human beings, of course, the worst, and also schools, universities, hospitals, mosques, and so forth. Churches, there are Christian Palestinians too. So we did get a phone call. This is about brutality coming from the other side, this question. And it's a question that we've heard quite a bit. Did you think what happened on October 7th was bad? Does she think Israeli hostages should be released? Saying that no one from, I think it says this side ever talks about what happened, or says that October 7th was bad. I mean, I don't know if I haven't experienced that to be true. But let's talk about in general that, let's talk about Hamas, for example. I don't know if you have an opinion or if you want to say anything about it, but here's this person saying, do you think these things are bad? There's also been, brutality from the other side.
Of course, there's brutality from the other side. Of course, you're going to see Palestinians running and raging. And I say this very strongly in the film. Don't ask the person who's in prison why they're trying to break their hands to get out and be free. What do you expect after people being put in a ghetto for 17 years without access to food, water, electricity? What do you expect is going to happen? If you put any human being, not Palestinian, in a cage, and you're not allowing them anything, And it's not Hamas that's only living in Gaza. It's children that are living in Gaza. It's the women of Gaza. It's the doctors. It's the nurses. It's the teachers. What do you expect?
Yeah.
What do you expect if this continues to happen? What, people are supposed to silently die? Of course, the images were horrific. There were things that we didn't expect to see and that we wouldn't like to be done in our name. And I've seen the families of the hostages being released. It was also a moment for us to see. We have 9,000 Palestinian hostages currently in Israeli prisons. Do you understand what is being done to them? I just got off the phone with one of my friends, and I didn't want to believe the story that Israeli Shabak are torturing our men and they are raping them inside the prisons. I didn't want to see the story that came out on New York Times. I didn't want to believe it until I called a friend and I asked who he was just released from prison, and he confirmed what is happening there.
I'm sorry, what is the Shabak?
The Shabak is the Israeli intelligence.
I see. Okay.
They are raping Palestinian men inside the detention centers. We have 9,000 Palestinian refugees. Of course, I want to see the Israeli hostages return home. Of course, I want to see the children back with their families. Of course, I don't want to see any child living under such a situation. And thank God that at least the hostages that have been released have been fed and have been cared for by the Palestinians. And even when Palestinians are being starved to death in Gaza, the hostages at least have been receiving food. Please look at the pictures of the Palestinian prisoners coming out of prison. Israel has stopped food for Palestinian prisoners. They're only allowed 1,700 calories a day. 8 men sit and eat 3 eggs and a few tomatoes. Our men are coming out of prison having lost half of their body weight. This is 9,000 Palestinians inside Israeli jails, including children that are being tortured inside Israeli jails. We want these hostages to be free, and we want all Israeli hostages to be free. Personally, I don't belong to any political group or party, and I can't speak for who is doing what. But what I would say is I wish everybody to go home and to be free with their families. And I wish Israeli brutality would end. I wish Israeli occupation and apartheid would end, and that Palestine will be free so that we can all live in freedom and justice. Because Israelis are, as I said, and the Jewish people are as occupied as we are.
And I guess the Palestinian Authority is supposed to be in charge in the West Bank in some areas, right? And I don't remember which is which area, A, B, or C. But we have heard that Netanyahu was funding Hamas specifically for the purpose of not wanting to have to negotiate with the Palestinian Authority, for example, or with a unified Palestinian leadership. And that seems pretty clear because I've heard that out of other prime ministers' mouths saying the same thing. And so do you feel like there is an entity to be negotiated with, or do you just feel like right now your job is something different? I'm not here to say who's to talk to who. The Palestinian Authority is as corrupt as can be. It doesn't represent the Palestinians. They also collaborate and work with the Israelis in order to protect Israel and its needs. The money that comes to the Palestinian Authority goes to a few rich people, and the rest of the Palestinian population lives in poverty. So I wouldn't advocate for having negotiations with them, because it's like Israel negotiating with itself. So if there's anything that needs to happen, it is the PLO is the House of Palestinians that represents Palestinians in the outside and inside Palestine. And if there's anything political, it needs to go through that, and not the Palestinian Authority, and not currently with Mahmoud Abbas as its leader. I see.
And Netanyahu funding Hamas, I wouldn't put it beyond him to do anything. Everything that he's doing is in order to maintain his position. He doesn't care about the hostages. He doesn't care about Israelis. He doesn't care about anyone except for himself. The moment he gets, if he drops this war, he goes into prison for corruption. So you can imagine why this man is fighting for his survival and fighting to stay in power.
Yeah, we've got the same thing going on over here in the United States, as you may know. And I want to ask you, because we're getting close to the top of the hour, you talk about healing from trauma and a sort of a Sufi process that you work with for people who are healing from trauma. But then, of course, there's ongoing trauma. I mean, I'm hearing a couple things. One, you may not be able to go back. Is that right?
Yeah. So that is a possibility. We have to see what will happen in this aggression and which government will hopefully take over and how things will change.
Yeah.
As for the healing work, I continue to do the healing work even now, and it's actually much easier for me to do it because I have been training people since 2018 in holistic approaches for trauma therapy, and we're doing the work in the West Bank, in Palestine, in Gaza. We're also supporting. We have 400 therapists volunteering from all over the world to provide therapy for Palestinians for free right now. And we also provide therapy for Jewish activists and international activists so that they can keep going.
And where
the
would
modality
people, could you just, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but where would people find that resource if they were looking for it?
It's they can go to my website, Ashira Prem Rachina. They can Google it. It's also on the Science and Non-Duality page and the film page. You will be able to access that platform and find out how you can also support us if you're a therapist who wants to provide training for a Palestinian therapist, or if you would like to go into delegations and support and do direct therapy. And the way
could you spell out the website, because you said your name and then a last name, and I think people would need that spelled out to find it.
Yes, sorry. It's
okay.
Ashira, Ashira, Prem, Prem, Rachina, Rachana, and that's that's the name that was given to me by my Osho community.
And is that .com or .org?
.com.
Okay, got
.com.
you. And how are you? This is a lot. It's a lot for people just looking from far away, right? It's a lot to keep seeing it in the news feeds, keep reading about it in the newspapers, and so on. It's a lot to handle and to process, and you are sort of living it fully in your background and your life, and then also coming here to promote the film and being on, talking with me, for example, over and over about this kind of trauma. And so how are you very specifically taking care of yourself?
So I have my own practice. It's kind of difficult now with the baby.
Yeah. All bets are off.
All bets are, exactly. It's like in between the breastfeeding sessions, I get to meditate with the tree. But I do my positive affirmations. I do Kundalini yoga, and I do Sufi whirling.
Okay.
And Sufi whirling has been my main catharsis in a way, because it allows me to, first it works on the nervous system, and this is why I promote the modality for continuous trauma, because it works on the brain. And I find resilience from I find my resilience from talking to people in Palestine, and what going through is nothing comparing to what people are going through in Gaza. So it's whatever I watch gives me more power and energy to keep going. And yeah.
Thank you
and
so
I have
much.
some good people supporting.
Yeah, and breastfeeding can be meditative too, as I recall. Depends, right? Sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Depends on his mood.
Yeah, his mood and your mood, yeah. Well, Ashira, we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank you so much for joining us. Ashira Ali Darwish, in the new film that's being released now, Where Olive Trees Weep. Thank you, and we look forward to continuing to follow your journey throughout the United States.
Thank you so much, and I hope people show up and watch the movie, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you. To see more information about screenings of this particular film, go to the website whereolivetreesweep.com, and go to events and go to the film premiere. Under events, there are a lot of very interesting webinars. One of them I noticed was called Reclaiming Our Jewish Identity, with a rabbi talking about how to feel about being Jewish at this time when there's just so much conflict about what's happening in Israel and Palestine. Local screenings of the film will be at the Center for Spiritual Living at 1818 Felt Street this Sunday, June 23rd at 6:30 p.m. and at Watsonville's Somos Cafe at 112 East Beach Street on Tuesday, June 25th at 6:30 p.m. Go to the Where Olive Trees Weep website or go to ReelWork, REEL work.org for information and to get tickets. Ashir will be in Oakland at the Grand Lake Theater with Dr. Gabor Mate and the film's producer on that same Tuesday, June 25th. So that's happening in Oakland. I believe the evening show is sold out, but there's a matinee in Oakland on the 25th, or you can go to Watsonville. Check out Moment of Truth past shows on Israel, Gaza, and Palestine, including Jewish, Palestinian, and Muslim dialogues at all of our podcast sites, including our compiled show on voices from student protesters and students from the encampments. And please remember, this show that you're listening to right now becomes a podcast, and you can directly subscribe to Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills at all your favorite podcast sites. And come join us at the Center for Spiritual Living on Sunday and meet the team. Please contact the Moment of Truth team at Amy, AMI, at ksqd.org with questions or comments about our program. Find our new podcast and like, review, subscribe, and comment at Spotify, Apple, and at YouTube. Amy's coaching and education website is at www.amychen.com. Moment of Truth gives many thanks to our team, Yanko Nyasu, sound and tech engineer, and our research and production team, Yanko, Mei-Ling Obinata, Todd Zimmerman, and Vara Ramakrishnan. Also including a new edition of Joy Schendeldecker. Todd Zimmerman of Nativeverse Studios created the theme song. Kathy Krizik created our logo. Thanks to our KSQD program manager, Howard Feldstein, and the entire KSQD team on the California Central Coast where this show originates. Thank you for tuning in to Moment of Truth. And remember, if we don't use our democracy, we lose our democracy.